would like to hand things over to Dr. Richard Pattenow.
Thanks, Kate. It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Marie Cini. But first, kudos and thanks to Morgan Johnson, Kate Johnson, and everyone at CETL for providing us with a super teaching and learning conference. What a great theme, students at the center, because that's who we are. It's perfect, and for that purpose, our speaker is perfect. Given the theme of our conference, given her knowledge and experience, also the recent restructuring at Ashford University puts a real emphasis, I think, on these topics. As Craig Swenson, the president, said, these initiatives increase our focus on building and strengthening the university's core academic programs that are most sought by working adults. And that's at the heart, I think, of what our speaker is going to talk about. Dr. Marie Cini is the president of CALE, which is the nation's preeminent organization studying and working on educational programs and policies for working adults. It's my honor to serve on her advisory committee, and I've seen her dynamic leadership up front. Now, you have a detailed resume online, but suffice it to say, she brings to CALE and to us a long and successful career as one of America's leaders in adult education. To that point, she was inducted into the International Adult Continuing Education Hall of Fame in 2016. And prior to CALE, she was Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Maryland University College, affectionately called UMUC. That's the nation's largest online public university. So clearly, she knows who our students are, she knows what we do, she knows our challenges, and her topic is On the Mark, driving new learning pathways with adult students at the center. Please welcome Dr. Marie Cini.
Thank you so much, Rich. It's really my honor to be here in general. I believe I was supposed to perhaps do this last year, but I couldn't make it work with my crazy schedule. But I was really disappointed because I love talking to faculty and I love talking to staff, especially at colleges and universities that are really focused on adults. It's probably my favorite thing to do because we're all kindred spirits. And it's particularly great to have Rich introduce me. He and I had one of the most interesting initial conversations when I became president of CALE, in that we agreed with everything that the other said, which was, that never happened. So I love his honesty and his, just ability to get to the heart of things. So it's my pleasure to be here. Look, all of you teach and work with adults, so it feels a little bit strange for me to be telling you anything about adult students, and you live this every day. But what I'm going to try to do is just go through some ideas, themes, etc., because I think about this all the time, and I've really kind of devoted my career to this idea of putting students at the center and creating experiences and pathways for them. And it's really what I'm trying to get CALE to move towards, because the world is changing, and I want to talk a little bit about how the world is changing and why we have to react to that. If you have questions, don't hesitate. I think we have the chat feature, and you could, pop in a question. I'm really open to you asking questions or making comments all the way through. All right, so I will tell you I did not do my own slides, and this slide, when I looked at these yesterday, I thought I'm going to take this out, but it was a little bit too late. I don't like to talk about myself. Look, I fell in love with adult students in the 80s. I was teaching part-time and working at a small college that was already working with adults because it was a population that was really needed some new formats to move back into higher education. And I did not grow up thinking that that would be my vocation, working with adult students in post-secondary, but it was just one of those things that just became so compelling to me, because every time I would work with them, I would realize how much the institution where I was working didn't focus on them. They were always an afterthought. They were always somebody that we taught at night. Services weren't designed for them. It would be little things, like there was no place for them to get anything to eat at the end of a long day if they were night classes. And so throughout my career, I have always aspired to wanting to be in a higher and higher position for one reason and one reason only, and that is that I could then at that next level hopefully have more of an impact on how to do a better job for adult students. And so that's kind of how my career came to be. And so I'd like to give you a little bit of an idea of where we're headed. So I wanted to make sure that we really focused on your needs and the students at Ashford rather than just talk about adults in general. Because while there are commonalities at any institution that serves adults, I think each institution also has its own specific set of demographics. I also want to talk a little bit about who are adult learners, because it's a question I get asked all the time. And I've really spent some time thinking about this, and I'd like to share with you the way I'm thinking about it now and just get your ideas. What are the needs of adult learners and how are we meeting them? I think that's changing quickly, and we all have to be catching up and getting ahead of this curve as we have more and more contemporary students coming through our virtual doors. The power of student-centered learning pathways. Look, I was, raised as a pretty traditional kid in college and, went through a pretty traditional research-based PhD. We never talked about students. We never thought about students. And it was always my desire to think about the students. And so I think it's a wonderful thing that now we are thinking about the students first and not just the content that we want to convey. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And then probably most importantly, it's what's the role of staff and faculty? It's your role. What do you do? How can you be part of this kind of new pathway going forward? And it sounds like you have some exciting things happening where you are, which I would love to hear more about. Okay, so let's talk about our learners. And in this case, your learners. And even though these are cartoon characters, you will notice that the person that I asked to put these slides together, I said, you have got to represent the diversity among their students. And I think he represented it well. I really push this when we're showing pictures. It's amazing to me sometimes when we do slides, or we often go to the traditional pictures of students, and we forget about the wide diversity of people who are trying to get some piece of higher education these days. So for Ashford, about 72% of your students are female. This is actually a little higher than at some institutions. There is a preponderance of women who are returning to college as adults. It's usually the bigger percentage, but 72 is, I think that's higher. I know at UMUC, we always were in a sort of 55 to 45. Native Americans too. Okay, excellent. If you want to add anybody that we're missing here, feel free. Half are from the South, which I found interesting. And I don't know, maybe you guys recruit from there, but I think regional diversity is also very important to think about. What's facing our adult students in certain parts of the country is very different from other parts of the country, and some of the rural versus urban can be very different. And so I think it's important for all of us, and I count myself as a faculty member too, because I try to teach. I haven't been able to for a little while, but even when I was provost, I always try to teach at least once a year, because I think you can easily get away from the whole reason why we have colleges and universities focused on adults if you don't stay in touch with what your students are doing. 62% of your students are Pell recipients, and 60% are from a diversity of backgrounds, so non-Caucasian. And so you've got a majority-minority student population. This might look a little different than, say, a traditional liberal arts college somewhere in, rural U.S. But what I would say is you all are very fortunate because you have the type of student population which is really becoming, this is the student population in our country. Diverse, people with all kinds of backgrounds, different financial situations, different socioeconomic status, different parts of the country. I think it will make our higher education richer. It's the whole point of why we have post-secondary in this country, is to give everybody the opportunity to learn more and then move up in their career, have a better life for their family. And I think it's always more interesting when you have a wide diversity of people in a virtual classroom or real classroom. One of the great things about online education, and I started in online, gosh, 1996. It's hard to believe that it's been that many years that we've been doing online education. I was what they call a pioneer. I started doing this with adult students at a pretty traditional college in Pittsburgh called Duquesne University. But we saw the value of this for adults. And one of the things that was very exciting was that at the university itself, in our classrooms, we were not a very diverse institution. Once we went online, the conversations, the courses, the students meeting one another, far, far richer. It was just a wonderful way to bring more diversity to that higher ed setting. So 9 out of 10 of your students are older than 25. 1 out of 4 are military, and 100% are online learners. Also, very important things to know and understand. And those of you who have had military students in your classes, you know what that means. UMUC had a lot of military students. These are great students. They always get their work in. They sometimes are in harm's way, even as they're studying for an exam. I mean, I'm always so amazed at our military students, like getting the job done, going to class, and they never make an excuse about why a paper is late. It was just always, it was pretty remarkable. Okay, so here's one of my favorite topics, and that is, what is an adult learner? So through the years, we've had different definitions. We've had, well, it's about age, right? So you can say, well, a lot of your students are over 25. You've got a lot of adults. But when is that magic place when they become an adult? Are they not an adult at 24? It always seemed to me that we were trying to have this sort of arbitrary definition. We were looking for a way to have a filter. But the way I think about it now is, and this took a while to evolve for me, but it's about a self-identity. And there's a researcher at North Carolina State University, Carol Casworm, and you can see her, the citation at the bottom of that little person who's graduating. Carol Casworm says that being an adult student is really about an identity. If your identity is anything other than, I am a college student, then you're probably an adult learner. This would include active duty military, even if you're 18 years old. It would include somebody who's 20 years old and has kids and a job. There are any number of people who are living. Oh, and Carol is on ASTRA's Board of Trustees. That's great. You guys rock, because she's terrific. I love her thinking. Adults, because they have all kinds of other things going on for them, are often quite unsure about their place in the institution. And even if it's a virtual institution, look, we all have our mental models of, well, there must be buildings and there must be, people with beards and pipes and, that are sitting around thinking great thoughts. And do I really belong in that university? Because again, they don't spend their time thinking of themselves as college students as their foremost identity. They are dedicated to learning, they absolutely are, but they have competing responsibilities. And again, I'm talking to the choir here, but you know this. If they have kids, they will choose their kids before themselves. They'll drop out if they don't have enough money for themselves, and they'll invest in their children. If they have to work late, they'll miss a class because they can't afford to lose their money from their job because they have these other responsibilities. They're also very transactional in a sense, and I don't think that's a bad thing. They're seeking a return on their investment. When you're an adult student, you don't have mom and dad, writing checks for you, and so you want to make sure that you're getting the value that you're paying for. And I think that's a key thing that finally we're starting to understand in this country, that we can't just treat people like they're our servants in a way, like, oh, you're my student, and if you can pass this course, great, and if not, I have no responsibility. That's how it used to be. It's no longer really, hopefully it's changing. I think that rather than make, we've all been through our own educational experience. And sometimes I see, even with adjuncts, that they'll turn around and treat students the way they were treated when they were in school, whether or not it was a good experience. And so, the point here is that adult learners, it's about their identity. They have very complex lives, and they're here for a reason. And so we need to really, I think, all of us have to step up our game and serve them better for a wide variety of reasons, not the least of which is because they deserve it and they're paying. Okay, so what are their needs? Increasingly, I think we're getting clear answers about this because there's a lot of research going on. Almost every year there's something that comes out about adult learners, why they're back in school, why they leave school, how many have credits but have never graduated. CALE is part of the Strata Education Network. And CALE has been around for 45 years, really focused on advocating for and championing adult students and trying to find ways to help them have more rapid rapid pathways between education to the workforce. And we started with the creation of prior learning assessment all those years ago. It was a small group of faculty who really saw that adults bring college-level learning from their life experience, but they don't have the credit for it. And so if they could just demonstrate that, forward-thinking colleges could give them credit. And so, I've worked with, I think I've had 4 prior learning assessment programs under me throughout my career. I'm sure you have one. And it's a great thing for adults. It's a little hard to execute. It's very difficult. You have to write papers or take a challenge exam. It's certainly not easy. And I've had adults say to me, well, I'd rather take the class, right? It's easier to just take the class because I know the material than it is to prove to you that I know it, which I think is actually in some ways very important because through the years we've been, as adult educators, we've often been told, well, you're just giving credits away, when it's just the opposite. It's just the opposite. One of the things that CALE has done is develop something that we call the Adult Learner 360. And it's an assessment instrument that helps institutions figure out, are adults getting the kinds of services that they need? And the adults can answer, your adult students can answer this survey, and then administrators at the college answer the survey. And it's a wide group of staff and administrators. And you generally see some gaps, right? And then we can help schools actually get better at those gaps. But there are some things that adults really need that often come out of this. So we know that they want and need hard skills. If adults come back and they want a degree in cybersecurity, of course they want to know how to be a cyber warrior, as we used to call them at UMUC. But increasingly, this idea of soft skills, or as Lumina calls them, power skills, are equally, if not more important. We're hearing from a number of employers now that they can actually teach the hard skills. If they want to hire a really smart person, hardworking, they can teach them coding. They can teach them finance. What they can't often teach are these power skills of communication, team building, emotional intelligence, the ability to influence positively, to get their ideas across. These are critically important. And I've had so many people say to me, and look, I came from social science and humanities, right? So I'm not a person who doesn't think highly of those skills. But what I have often seen is that when we just say, well, yeah, they get those soft skills in the gen ed, general education, I think that we aren't making enough of a case. In other words, if you have students sitting through, the menu options, like 2 from this category and 1 from this category, we don't always know how those courses are designed. And it might be a course in art history, it might be a course in anthropology. Will they learn to think better? Will they learn to write better? Only if it's designed to help them write better, think better, work in teams better. And so you're seeing more and more schools. UMUC did the same thing. I would be really surprised if you guys weren't doing this, where the general education courses now are being purposely designed so that these power or soft skills are actually outcomes of that course. And so people can actually come out and say, yes, I've learned to work in a team. I can write in a succinct and hard-hitting way. And so, but adults also need, let's see, the CHAMPS peer mentoring program is phenomenal. Okay, excellent. Good. I like the little ads that come up. I feel like I'm like, you know, allowing you to talk about more of your services. That's great. Guidance is really important. One of the big myths that we see with adult students is that often people will think that, well, adults know what they want. You don't have to do a career advising. You don't really have to do much coaching. They know they want to major in IT. You know they want to major in nursing. Well, no, they don't. They're like the rest of us. They have a restricted view of what careers are out there. And I include myself in that. When I grew up, I was a blue-collar kid. I knew there were teachers and doctors, and there were all of these sorts of, you know, blue-collar jobs, which I decided I didn't want, but I didn't know a lot about the professional jobs. And so, you know, I would just pick whatever job that I had experienced recently and pick that to tell people when they'd ask me what I wanted. Adults aren't that different. Like, they watch TV, they see ads, they see CSI, they get interested in criminal justice. I mean, we get our career knowledge from all sorts of places that might or might not have anything to do with what we're good at, we're passionate at. But you're seeing more schools now really focus on career guidance almost at the very beginning of the program and embedded all the way through the program itself. There is a university that Kale is actually right around the corner from. It's called National Louis University, and they have been around teaching adults for a very long time. And they have embedded career guidance, career awareness activities, connections to mentors, associations, all the way through, because they work with a lot of students who don't have access to this kind of guidance at home. They don't have the network that, say, upper-class parents might have that they would be exposed to. And it's really important to put this all the way through the curriculum, and especially for adult students who don't have time to go off and take an internship, et cetera. Adult students also need measurable outcomes. I would say all students do, but since I'm focused on adult students, they need to know that the curriculum that you've put together will actually help them move into the career that they want. And so this isn't just, wow, we have to do assessment because our regional accreditors say we have to do assessment. Now it's really serious. It's, wait a minute, our students need to know that they have been able to reach all the competencies of a registered nurse, of a radiology technician, of a data scientist. And what you never want is that a student will go out and be on the job and say, well, I never learned that. That was not something I learned to do, and then have them not be successful. So I think we're getting to a point where it's very serious now, and I'll talk more about employers and how employers have to be at the table in a couple of slides. So our adult students' needs being met. Well, thumbs up and thumbs down. I would say that, again, I'm speaking to an institution that puts adults first, serves adults as sort of the center of what they do. So I would bet for Ashford, you do a lot more for those adult students than many other institutions do. And let me just make a comment about, you know, for-profit, not-for-profit. To me, that's almost immaterial. What your business model is quite different from how you set yourself up to serve your students. And one of the things that for-profits did when there was an emergence of for-profits was to actually have the adult students really, you viewed them as consumers, and you took care of them, and you wrapped your experiences around them. What many nonprofits will not tell you, and including UMUC, is that they borrowed a whole lot of your structure and your ideas. And so I always tell people, If you had walked into UMUC when I was provost and you didn't know who we were, and I explained to you how we had our university set up, you would likely think we were a for-profit. We were not, but we certainly put students at the center. And so I think we do a disservice when we just put all of the, well, all of the for-profits are bad, all of not-for-profits are good. No, it's the world is a far more complex place than that. And I've seen a lot of nonprofits that aren't serving their students very well. So when I talk about are we meeting them or not, it really comes down to each institution. And I think each institution has to ask these questions. And this is something that I really want Kale to help more institutions do. So I think access is we've covered access. If you are a student and you want a low-cost alternative and you don't want a face-to-face class, you can probably find a program online. You can go to a community college. There are just all kinds of options. Now, I'm not saying that they are the best one for you or that you will necessarily be successful or that they're necessarily well-designed, but I'm just talking about access. We have a lot of access in this country. What we don't have is a success model. And I think it's almost like I don't know, I've seen too much of this where we feel like in academe that we have to put obstacles in students' way. Like it has to be hard for them and they have to struggle and they need to go to the bursar and figure out what a bursar is because darn it, I did it when I was in college and I learned from that. And it's this strange badge of courage that we all, carry around. And one of the clubs that I've seen used often, which just amazes me, is APA, right? So I've seen adjunct faculty who do not use APA in their day-to-day life take points off and beat up on students because they're not getting APA correct in their papers. Now, should students cite where they got their ideas? Certainly. But when you get down to taking points off because there's a period missing or the year's in the wrong place, it gets a little ridiculous. Instead, what I'd love to see are colleges and universities starting with a different premise. The premise is we have accepted you into our university. Now, what success structure can I develop so that it's actually easier to succeed than it is to fail? We actually make it easier to fail than to succeed, right? I mean, if you drop out, we let you drop out. We go, adult students drop out. They sometimes have to take a course off, a semester off. We actually did some research at UMUC about why students take off, because I actually don't believe this thing about life happened. I mean, I believe life happened, but that's not why they dropped off. I think that many students drop out because they feel bad about themselves. They are maybe getting C's. They sort of get through a couple of classes. They don't really know if they're doing very well. They don't get a lot of feedback unless they're in a university that really creates ways for them to know how they're doing. And so if they don't really understand what the degree is going to get them and they're sort of meandering through gen ed courses or those first courses that they have to take, they lose their focus on why they're there. And it's easier then to say, well, life happened, my kid got sick, and so I needed to take a semester off. I used to challenge my faculty, like, why don't we design programs that no matter what else is going on in life, students would rather be studying because it's such an enriching, great experience. And there's no reason why we can't design things that way. And it's interesting because we used to run focus groups, and I used to say this to my faculty, and they thought I was crazy. I know they thought I was crazy. We actually had a student say that once in a focus group. I mean, he literally looked at the window and said, I leave all the time because my life gets hectic, and, honestly, classes aren't that compelling. Like getting through it is what I do, but it's not like I feel like I really learned all this great stuff. He said, you need to make it that exciting for me that I don't want to drop out. And I don't think that's too much to ask. I really don't. I think sometimes we just think it has to be sort of drudge, has to be like a long slog. I'm not talking about making the content easy. I'm talking about making it an engaging experience. So let's talk about what's a brighter future for adult learners. What can we do to actually sort of change not just what we do in the classroom, but I think how we approach programs, period, that our adults are in. So one of the things I wanted to talk about are student-centered learning pathways. There was a study done by the Department of Education in 2009. It was a meta-analysis of all of the research that had been done on, that age-old question, is online learning as good as face-to-face learning? And that always used to rankle me when it was asked that way. We never, ever asked, hey, how good is face-to-face learning, right? We just assumed that was the gold standard. And so when this meta-analysis was done, what they said that the best form of learning was actually hybrid, some face-to-face, some online. Second best was online. And actually the worst was face-to-face. And I'm amazed. I always bring this up even though it's 10 years old because many people haven't heard of it. And it was our own Department of Education in this country, at the federal level, that did this research. And so when you dug into it, and so a lot of people then would just say, oh, so online is good, but hybrid's the best. Let's just do hybrid. If you really dug into why hybrid was the best, and followed by online, then followed by face-to-face, it was about learning design. There wasn't anything magic about the delivery method. It was that you have to design courses more carefully when it's hybrid because, you got to get the rhythm right. And what is it that they're going to do? What do the students do when they're face-to-face and what do they do online? It's actually pretty easy to teach face-to-face. You can literally walk in with your notes, right, from the last time and just start lecturing. Hopefully we've gotten past that. But the more you have to think about designing your programs and your courses, the better it is for students because we can then actually ask, well, how are they, how do they learn? And so a couple of different things to talk about. One is personalized learning, this idea of each learner is slightly different, and so how can we serve them slightly differently? I think one of the answers to that, or an option, is adaptive learning in certain cases. And a third one is I think we need to do far better with having employers participate and be deeply part of how we put our programs together and even what the students are experiencing while they go through their programs. Look, like it or not, and I've had arguments with people about this, that education, it shouldn't be, they always say it shouldn't be narrow vocational technical education. And so one of the things that I always say is, yeah, but what are you saying about those of us, all of us have jobs, right? Except for the few people who study because they actually want to be a faculty member, and that was me. But everybody else really wanted a job, and being a faculty member is a job. I have been reminded of that too. But the point is that we shouldn't think of getting somebody prepared for their career as like narrow or dumbed down. There's a lot, like the creative thinking that you have to do, the critical thinking you have to do every day on your job is enormous. And that's what we're really getting people ready to do, not just to, make widgets. So personalized learning, we use this term all the time, but I like to think of it as learning models that combine some sort of online and in-person instruction that's tailored to the student. You might call this hybrid, but hybrid and personalized are different. But when you're personalizing, I think you really do have to think about face-to-face and online. And look, I have spent my life championing online education. I know that most of what you do is online. One of the things I'm going to say, though, is I think in the future, we're going to see more of these models where students get just the right amount of face-to-face instruction or services. It might not even be instruction. It might be services. It might be problem solving. And so I'll talk about some of the universities. There's Strayer University is one that's doing this. There's another one that's about to start. I know of several that are putting these plans in place. So examples could be flipped classrooms or flex classrooms, or building relationships as you're helping the student actually move through the program. The more you can use technology in this, the better, because honestly, as a faculty member, you don't have time to understand each person's pathway. But with technology, you can actually follow what the person is learning and hopefully have the lessons really approach what they need to know. Again, Strayer is doing this very interesting hybrid campus model, and they're going to be growing it, and it's really focused on support. So it's not classrooms, but it's, okay, I'm an online student. I might need to come in and just network with some of my peers. Or I might want to just come in and check in about, are my study skills what they should be? And so these are small spaces. And I just think this is more, you're going to see more of this going forward. So we decided to, one of your own faculty are, one of the good slides that they had up there, and I won't even try to pronounce the name, but one of your faculty really talked about this idea of relationship building, that it's not just content, that if you have success in a program, by building a relationship with them, they can then take that relationship and that success into their career. We've all seen the research, right, where traditional students who connect with someone, even if it's the janitor when they go off to college, are more likely to retain and to graduate. The same is true for adults. It doesn't matter if it's online. If they can connect with a faculty member, if they connect with an advisor, if there's someone that they know and they feel cares about them, it makes a huge difference. They're much more likely to succeed and to move forward. Especially because, remember my story of, I was a blue-collar kid. Many of our contemporary students are not from families who feel like they really belong in this sort of this professional world. And the more we can help them move into that professional world and feel comfortable, the better. I think there was a comment that came up about, can you build relationships online? I actually think I have stronger relationships with, and this was true from 1996 on, with some of my students in my online classrooms than I ever did in my face-to-face classrooms. Now, I go out of my way to try to develop a relationship, and I'm not talking about crossing lines here. Like, I don't go out drinking with my online students, but I try to make sure that I do some private interaction with each of them, checking in, seeing if they're struggling, etc. I try to be, pretty aware of what's going on in the class, and I have, the social presence that I'm sure you're all used to learning about. I think you can feel very, very connected to students, and they can feel connected to you. Adaptive learning. This has been around for a while. There was a lot of promise with adaptive learning. And this is the technology that after you answer a couple of questions, it can sort of assess what you already know and sort of where you are, and then help you by helping you just learn what you need to learn. It's responsive technology. It's much more active. And so you take these pre-course tests, et cetera, and it builds on what you already know. There's been some success. Most of the success in fields, as you can imagine, like math, where you can really lay out how does a student learn? What's the learning methodology? Topics that are a bit less, right and wrong, are a little bit harder with adaptive learning. Not impossible, but harder. And they're very expensive to build well, because you basically have to build the model across many students of how you learn a domain. And you can do that, but it's hard to do. And so, however, there are adaptive learning platforms. Again, I would imagine that, you use them in some of your courses, but in the future, we're going to see more and more of this as machine learning kind of comes up to speed and then can help us figure these things out. I think it's exciting when it first started to be a thing in education. It's exciting because too often And if you get into building, you can see that we sometimes, because we don't know about how we learn, we build curriculum in the wrong ways. And let me, this was when I was a dean at UMUC, we had our faculty map out, just using taxonomy, the outcomes that were expected in their courses all the way through an academic program, starting with year 1, then year 2, 3, 4. Now, it seemed to me, and I just assumed that they probably would have mapped it out so that you start with lower levels of thinking, and then you know, by the 4th year, you're doing advanced thinking. It turns out they had never really done that. They had never really looked at it, and so we had some first-year courses that were asking students to do things that we never taught them how to do that were pretty advanced. And then there were some 4th-year courses that were pretty basic. And it was a shock to the program directors. You know, suffice it to say that their dean, who was me, forced them to, we all together redid the curriculum, because you can't ask students to go out of order like that. You can't ask them to think in bigger ways in their 1st year than you're asking them to do in their 4th year. And so with adaptive learning, you actually have a technology that can help you sort of already put that in place. So employer participation, I think one of them, I'm going to make a prediction here, that one of the things we're going to see just an explosion of is work-based learning. And by work-based learning, it's more than just an internship. It's more than just an experience with an employer. It's really the folding together of learning and work. And so Northeastern University has a great example with Boeing. And Boeing has a number of 2-year technical engineers, like engineer technicians, and they needed them to get to the level of a 4-year engineer. And so but they couldn't let them leave the job. Like they just didn't have enough of them to say, well, yeah, go study and come back when you're done. And so they brought in Northeastern, who developed a model where even on their day-to-day projects, they were learning not just how to do the project the way they've always known it, but they actually added the higher levels of learning as they were going through their day-to-day work. And they had mentors and faculty on the shop floor. It's really an interesting model, and I'm starting to see more of this kind of thing start to happen, especially in advanced manufacturing, where you literally can't take people off the shop floor, but you need, say, engineers or IT experts. It's going to be more and more relevant because the level of learning, the speed of learning is not going to slow down. It's only going to increase. And this idea of taking someone either out of the job and have them go finish a degree, or even ask them to, after a very busy day, go home and then log online or, drive to your nearest college. It's hard to do. These are such busy people. And by having it actually based at the employer's place of business, then you also can work with them to put the right, just the most up-to-date learning outcomes into your framework for those employees. And it's really, if you see it done well, it's really wonderful. It's hard to do, but I think it's a very exciting area, and you're going to see more of this. So let me give you an example of this. At Marquette University, back when data science became a big thing, but there weren't enough of them, and there were no training programs, no programs out there. Who knew what data science was, right, 10 years ago? Northwestern Mutual and Marquette University and the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee came together. Northwestern put in a large amount of money because they needed data scientists, so they partnered with these universities. And they put together internships, mentorships, co-op programs, and it's all within a shared space so that people can all be learning together, the employers, the university. It's another version of workplace learning, although In this case, you might have students who are not yet working at that institute or at that company, but now they can, it's almost like a talent pipeline for them because they're studying all together in a building off to themselves. So I think just there's some really interesting ways that communities are coming together across different sectors that will make higher education really richer, which is, I think, a really important thing to do. Closing the skills gap. So somebody the other day said to me, oh, I don't think there's a skills gap. People just, you know, they're just, I think they basically were saying they're just lazy. They don't want to go get the jobs. Well, it's ridiculous. There is definitely skills gaps out there. They probably differ by the region. And so I think sometimes we make these broad sweeping generalizations like we need more IT skills or we need more healthcare skills or something. But you have to really focus in on the region where you are to see what's needed and where the gaps are. And I think that adult learners are the key to all of this. So there are skills gaps. Yeah, you betcha. There's skills gaps in I'm sure in Chicago. There's skills gaps in California. But if you actually like dive into the population, you will find a lot of adults who have some of the knowledge maybe to fill these. And we just have to think differently about how to put modules of education together to get them there. You probably have a lot of people who are 70 to 80% of the way to one of these jobs, but we just in this, and it happens every time I talk with employers or state government or the mayor's office, they immediately go to how many students are coming out of high school and then how many students are coming out of the colleges and universities. They completely forget that one of the best areas to think about are, well, where are the adults that are already working somewhere that they have some of these skills and would love to move into a higher paying job. And so Kale in the past has done some work between folks who worked at, you know, in retail who were being displaced and then getting them some training to another level that hospitals would hire them as sort of intake specialists. Now, I don't have to tell you, going from, say, working at a Walmart to an intake specialist at a hospital, you know, their salary went up, their benefits were better, it was probably a better, you know, schedule for them. And so that's just one example, but we need to be thinking like this, this sort of continuous upskilling and reskilling of our adults. And so, you know, some of the biggest skills that are lacking are artificial intelligence and machine learning. High tech is still going to be one of the big areas. And so we've got to figure out ways. Here's another pet peeve I have. We give adult students a pass. They can say, well, I don't like math. My brain doesn't do math. I don't think of math. I'm not good at technology. I think that we have to stop letting that be okay. In order to have a good job in the future, you're going to have to know something about these areas, and we have to demystify them rather than say, oh, it's okay, I know you can't do math, so here, major in this other thing. That's a disservice to them. And there was research done years ago, which I found really compelling. I did some research far back in my life on this idea of math anxiety. It turns out that it's not so much math anxiety, it's math avoidance. People avoid math. And even people who major in majors, in programs where they need math, they might not love math, but they know they have to know it in order to do this job that they want to do. That just hit me. I mean, I have never forgotten that. And that's why I like say, forget the excuses. Like, there are certain things we need to know. Reading, writing, and some of these other skills and technologies that are going to be really important for the jobs of the future. So one of the things I want to bring to your attention is something called the 60-year curriculum. And I would say that even where you're sitting as student-focused as you are, you really have to look at the way our lives are going to be probably sooner than we think, maybe 5 to 10 years from now, which is people are going to be living longer. They already live pretty long. They're going to live longer. They're going to be working for 60 years. There is some speculation that the first person to live to 150 has recently been born. And when you're living that long and you're working that long, a 4-year degree, I don't care if you're 18 to 22 or 25 to 30, that's not going to last you your whole life. We have to reconceptualize higher education as a series of modularized, whether it's certificates, credentials, whatever, and we have to help people learn as they work. I still believe people will want to achieve something like a baccalaureate degree. There still is this thing in our culture about, I have a college degree, it means something. But it might be that they don't actually achieve it until, say, they're 40, and that becomes the more common model rather than 22. And we know that not most students, like the majority of students, well, it's just over 50% that actually do graduate when they go to college at the regular time period, but a whole lot don't. And so why don't we make the standard 40 and we start with a credential that gets a student a first good job, and then they move up through there. And then the stigma goes away. You're not somebody who was left behind, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You are just living and learning in our lives, which is what we have to do, and it is what we do. Oh, and you can see the New York Times recently had an article on the 60-year curriculum, and it's really interesting. So if you go into the New York Times just archives, you can just type that in and it'll come up. It's a really interesting article. So where do you come in? So the role of faculty and staff. Look, I think, and I say this because as I said, I always have taught all the way through. In fact, I was going to tell Rich to just say, Marie's, but Marie's a faculty member. She's taught thousands of students online because at the core of who I am, that's how I think of myself. But one of the things that I think we have to do more of, and we have to help and help our faculty learn to do this and put them at the core of this. The days of just delivering content are really over. Content is ubiquitous. You can get content anywhere. We have to be better at not just our content, but knowing how students learn so we can present it in a way and in an experience that they can learn and they can do what it is that they're coming to us to learn to do. Now, a lot of times, and this was true at UMUC, we had a curriculum group. We had a set of instructional designers, and that's all well and good. But I think in this country, we have left the faculty behind. We sort of, oh, those faculty, they're so traditional, they don't want to change. I don't think that's true. I think they care about quality. Now, sure, some probably are like that, but I think we care about quality. We care about doing things right for the students, and maybe we just weren't exposed to doing things differently. But once we learn that there's better ways to teach, better ways to develop the program, it can be really exciting. When I was at UMUC, we actually, in my last couple of years, we moved the entire curriculum to open educational resources. And I had faculty who, I remember the head of psychology, he walked into my office and threw the book down, and he goes, the Psych 101 book, and he was like, how are you going to get free resources to replace this? And I said, well, they're already out there, Thomas. I was like, this is not a mystery. This is happening. And he went from being my biggest, just pushed against all of this to being one of the biggest advocates. He was so proud of his program. Yes, yay, hooray for OER, because it's good for the students. The materials are out there, the materials are high quality, and students don't have to pay, or they pay very little. And so that's the sort of thing, let's just help give our faculty development. It's universities, this is great that you're having this development. A lot of universities don't put very much into faculty development, and I think they really owe that to them. So in conclusion, if there's a conclusion, adult learners are diverse, they are everywhere. One of the things that drives me nuts, you've heard several things that drive me nuts. People will say to me, I don't know how to find adult students. Where are adult students? I don't know how to go find them. And open your eyes, look around, take an Uber, take a Lyft, go to a restaurant. Like, everybody is out there. We're all adult learners from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic strata. Everybody is on their journey. Adult students, and I would say that we are coming into a time in our existence when that's the typical student now. That's who we're going to be building our education for. They have different needs and identities than traditional students. We need to keep innovating with different kinds of models, and we've got to keep thinking about this idea of the 60-year curriculum, meaning that we've got to help people continue to learn and make it simple for them to access that learning. Online was, I think, phase one, but now it's time to move even beyond that to make their lives even better in terms of being able to get education for the kinds of lives they want to lead. Faculty and staff will always be at the center of that. I think we can never get away from this human relationship that we need to build and help our students with. It's one of the most important parts of an education. But there's a lot of things that we can do outside of the faculty that can help the students learn and actually make faculty lives a little bit easier. Like, I'd rather be spending time coaching students and talking with them than grading, the same paper over and over and over again. So, I'm one who's like, bring me grading technology because I want to spend time with students.